I still remember the sound before anything else. It wasn't the wind through the cedars or the distant lowing of cattle across the ridge. No, it was sharper than that, metal against metal, the dull slam of a mailbox door, followed by the faint hiss of paper sliding where it didn't belong. I walked down the gravel drive, dust rising around my boots, and felt it in my gut. Something was wrong. My ranch had stood here for 150 years, long before anyone in this town decided to draw maps or write bylaws, and yet that morning the universe that left me a gift wrapped in white. Inside the envelope, the words screamed in bold black ink, "Immediate compliance required." For a moment I just stared, trying to connect the dots. Compliance with what? My fence, my barn, my entire history. Then the name hit me like a sour taste. Karen, president of the local HOA, signed at the bottom. Karen with her sunglasses too, sharp for sunlight, her clipboard clutched like a sword, that permanent curl of disapproval carved into her lips. She had finally found her next target. My first reaction was confusion. My second, laugh that didn't sound like me, low and dangerous. This was my ranch. My great-grandfather built that fence with hand-hewn cedar when the town was nothing but mud tracks and cattle trails. My father repaired it when storms split trees like matchsticks. And now Karen wanted it torn down, replaced with soulless vinyl, to match her subdivision's aesthetic. She wanted to erase a century and a half of sweat and history with plastic panels. I told myself it had to be a mistake. My ranch wasn't in her jurisdiction. My deed was older than her HOA. Older than the paved road she drove in on, older than her neighborhood itself. But then knock, knock, knock. The sound carried through the halls of the ranch house like a gunshot. I opened the door and there she stood. Karen, flanked by two board members, smirk sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Carter," she said like she was announcing my sentence, "your property is now subject to HOA bylaws. Our jurisdiction expanded last month. You'll find the paperwork binding." Her words hung in the air like barbed wire. Expanded jurisdiction. Binding paperwork. Daily fines. Possible lien. The board members at her side nodded like soldiers under command. She thought she had me cornered, just another landowner too tired or broke to fight back. I didn't shout. I didn't slam the door. I just let the silence grow heavy. Then said the only words that mattered. "You can't annex my ranch like a medieval warlord." Karen's smile widened, but she didn't know the truth. She didn't know that I had spent 20 years in banking, that I held the controlling share in the very bank that financed her neighborhood, that carried her HOA's account, that owned her mortgage. She was threatening me with bylaws. I held the keys to her kingdom. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch staring at the cedar posts that lined my land. Each one weathered, each one a monument to my family's fight to hold this soil. If Karen wanted war, then war she'd get by. I wasn't bringing fists or lawyers first. I was bringing something sharper, something she couldn't see coming. By sunrise I was driving into town, dust trailing behind my truck like smoke before a fire. Westfield First Bank rose ahead, its stone columns catching the morning light. People saw just a bank, but for me it was an arsenal. I walked through the doors, past the tellers who greeted me as Mr. Carter, and straight into my office. On my desk sat the files of every account under our roof, including one labeled Westfield Estates Homeowners Association. I leaned back in my chair, tapping the envelope Karen had sent me against the wood. Did she realize? Did she have any clue that her empire was built on ground I owned twice, over once in deed, and once in debt? I could freeze her projects. I could stall her contractors. I could choke her HOA without lifting a finger. The thought alone almost made me smile, but revenge rushed too fast spoils itself. No, this needed patience, precision. I decided to walk into her den first. The next HOA meeting was held in a windowless conference room at the community center. Too cold, too sterile, a place where people argued over lawn heights and mailbox colors as if the fate of the world depended on them. Karen stood at the head of the table mid-lecture, her voice slicing into an old man about the approved shade of beige for his mailbox. That was Karen's more rules, big punishments. Her eyes cut across the room when I walked in. The chatter stopped. "Mr. Carter," she said, ice in her tone. "This meeting is for HOA members only." I smiled slowly. "Well then, lucky for you, I'm here as a concerned future member at least, according to your letter." A ripple of chuckles ran through the room. Karen's jaw tightened. She gestured sharply to a chair. "Sit, we'll address your violations when it's your turn." So I sat. I listened to an hour of petty complaints, garden gnomes too whimsical, grass too tall by half an inch, Christmas lights still twinkling in February. It was absurd, almost comical, but every minute built the tension, because I knew my turn was coming, and when it did, I'd drop a truth that would shatter Karen's smirk into dust. Finally, she leaned back, reading from her clipboard like a judge delivering a sentence. "Replace all fencing. Limit livestock. Remove barn. Submit landscaping for approval." Her voice dripped with certainty, with that smug power of someone who thinks the system is untouchable. When she finished, I leaned forward. My voice was low, steady. "Karen, before I respond, you should know something. Your HOA account at Westfield First Bank, the one that pays for your landscaping, Your contractors, even your stipend happens to cross my desk. The room froze. Karen blinked, then forced a laugh. You're bluffing. I didn't move. I don't bluff. And in that silence, the balance shifted. Karen's smirk cracked, just for a heartbeat. It was the kind of flicker most people wouldn't notice, but I did. Years in banking had trained me to spot the smallest signs of doubt, the twitch in a client's hand when signing a loan, the hesitation before agreeing to an interest rate. And in that cold, over-conditioned conference room, Karen had just flinched. You don't scare me, she snapped, though her voice had sharp and brittle at the edges. This HOA runs by the book. I leaned back calm as stone. Good, I said softly, because banks run by the book too. And right now, your book is open on my desk. The silence that followed was thick. A few board members exchanged uneasy glances, their loyalty already wobbling. Karen slammed her clipboard down like a gavel, but the sound didn't echo the way she hoped. For the first time, she looked less like a queen and more like a pawn. I didn't press further. Not yet. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and left the room. But I made sure every set of eyes followed me out the door. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. Fear spreads faster than truth, and Karen had just tasted both. The next morning my phone rang before I'd even finished my coffee. Mr. Carter, a voice stammered. It was Paul, the HOA treasurer. He sounded like a man standing in quicksand, desperate to grab anything solid. Karen wants to clarify. Maybe things got off on the wrong foot. I almost laughed. Tell Karen I'll be happy to clarify after I finish reviewing your accounts. By noon, I had the files spread across my desk. What I found was worse than expected. The HOA was drowning. Their reserves were low, dangerously low. Payments to contractors had been stretched thin, and the crown jewel, a pending loan application for a community beautification project. I didn't need a crystal ball to guess what that meant: stone archways, overpriced landscaping, vanity projects designed to cement Karen's power, and a loan approval. It required my signature. That afternoon, I called Karen directly. She answered with forced confidence. Mr. Carter, she said. Cool and clipped. Karen, I replied. Before we continue our little fencing discussion, I thought you should know your HOA loan review crosses my desk tomorrow. Large request, minimal collateral, declining reserves, risky situation. Wouldn't you agree? The silence on the line was deafening. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head, her perfect control unraveling. You wouldn't dare use your position to what? I interrupted. Make a sound financial decision. I let the pause stretch, savoring. Banking is about trust, Karen, and right now your leadership doesn't inspire confidence. But I'm willing to keep an open mind provided my ranch remains untouched. When I hung up, I knew she was cornered. Not beaten, not yet, but cornered. And people like Karen, they don't surrender. They plot. Sure enough, the next morning a certified letter was shoved into the gate of my ranch. Inside, in Karen's sharp handwriting, was a notice of violation and intent to place a lien. She claimed I owed over $8,000 in retroactive dues, plus fines for non-compliance, retroactive dues. For 5 years I'd never been part of her HOA, never signed her covenants, and she was trying to rewrite history with a pen. It was laughable, but also dangerous. Karen was gambling that I wouldn't want the headache of lawyers, that I'd fold before court. She didn't know me. I called Frank, my attorney, silver-haired, sharp as a blade, and loyal to my family for decades. He read the letter, chuckled, and leaned back in his chair. This is amateur hour, he said. She's got no jurisdiction, but if you'd like, we can make this very uncomfortable for her. Do it, I said. While Frank drafted a formal response, I set my own wheels in motion. The pending loan, I marked it under extended review. That single stroke of a pen froze. Karen's dream project in place. No funds, no contractors, no flashy entrances, and like clockwork, the ripple began. Within 48 hours, vendors called me privately, asking if payments were secure. I told them they might want guarantees from the HOA directly. By the end of the week, residents were whispering grass uncut, pools cloudy, the HOA's perfect facade was crumbling, and the cracks all led back to Karen. But Karen wasn't built to retreat. She doubled down. At the next meeting, she stormed in with a thick folder, slammed it on the table, and announced, "This is evidence of Mr. Carter's abuse of power. He's threatening our community." Gasps spread. Some neighbors looked confused. A few nodded, eager for drama. I let her finish. Then I stood, calm, steady, deadly. "Karen," I said, "everything I've done is legal, ethical. What you've done, fraudulent fines, fake jurisdiction, threatening unlawful liens, that is harassment." And then I pulled my own folder from under my arm. Copies of her letters, audio recordings of her threats, and Frank's legal notice declaring her personally liable for damages if she continued. The board murmured. Karen's face drained. She opened her mouth, but Paul, the treasurer, beat her to it. His voice was shaking, but it carried weight. "I think it's time for a leadership change." The room shifted. In that moment, Karen lost the one thing she valued most: control. The moment Paul's words left his mouth, The conference room fell into a silence so heavy you could hear the hum of the flickering fluorescent lights overhead. Karen clutched her folder tighter, like it could somehow shield her from the truth, closing in. For years, she had ruled with fear, clipboards, fines, and threats whispered across neat picket fences. But fear is fragile. Once it breaks, there's no putting it back together. I move for a vote, Paul said, voice steadier now. Karen snapped her head toward him, eyes blazing. You can't do this. I am the elected president of this HOA. But the cracks were already spreading. One by one, hands began to rise. Paul's first, then the secretary's, then another, and another. Each raised hand was another nail in the coffin of Karen's reign. No, she whispered, shaking her head as if denial could rewrite reality. You're making a mistake. But the vote carried. The gavel came down with a hollow thud. Karen was officially removed. Her voice, once sharp enough to slice through steel, broke into a frantic pitch. This is harassment. He's manipulating all of you. You'll regret this. But no one looked at her. The same board members who had flanked her at my door days earlier refused to meet her eyes now. She wasn't their queen anymore. She was a liability. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply gathered my folder, nodded politely, and walked out. The sound of her shouting faded behind me, echoing like a ghost in a room that no longer belonged to her. The next morning, Frank delivered the final blow, a signed exemption agreement from the new interim president, stamped and sealed. In legal terms so clear even Karen couldn't twist them, it declared my ranch untouchable. No current or future HOA rules would ever apply. My family's land was finally safe, but I wasn't finished. Karen still had her mortgage still under my bank's roof. I wasn't petty enough to interfere with her payments, but policy gave me one option: a compliance review. Routine, perfectly by the book, but thorough enough to turn her life upside down. I signed the order. Days later, as the sun broke over my cedar fence, I sat on my porch sipping black coffee. The ranch was quiet, timeless. Every post, every plank whispered of history that no HOA could erase. That's when I heard the low rumble of an engine. A silver SUV rolled down the dirt road, spotless, polished. Karen's car. She slowed as she passed, her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look at me. No smirk, no clipboard, just silence. I raised my mug and took a slow sip. She was driving back to her subdivision, to a kingdom she no longer ruled. The battle was over. My ranch had stood for 150 years, and it would stand for 150 more. But battles like this never end clean. Later that week, Paul called again. His voice carried the weight of exhaustion. Mr. Carter, Karen, she isn't letting go. She's calling residents, spreading rumors, trying to rally them against you. Of course Karen wasn't built to fade quietly. For people like her, power wasn't a role, it was oxygen. Without it, they'd claw at the air until their nails bled. Let her claw, I said calmly. The harder she fights, the more she exposes herself. But I knew Karen, she wouldn't just claw, she'd strike. And the next strike would be desperate, reckless, dangerous. Sure enough, 3 nights later, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside my gate. Headlights cut through the dark, spilling across the barn. I grabbed the shotgun from behind the door, not out of fear, but tradition. Ranchers don't greet the unknown empty-handed. The truck idled, engine rumbling. Then a door slammed. Heavy footsteps crunched closer. It wasn't Karen, it was Paul. He stood in the pale glow of the porch light, eyes darting nervously. Sweat beaded his forehead despite the cool night air. Mr. Carter, he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. She's planning something big. She says if she can't control the HOA, she'll bring you down another way. I narrowed my eyes. What way? Paul swallowed hard. She's talking about your bank. The night seemed to tighten around us. Karen had finally realized the one battlefield where we were truly matched. She couldn't touch my ranch, but she thought she could tarnish my name, my livelihood, the institution I built with my own hands. And that's when I knew the war wasn't over. It had only just shifted ground. The next morning, the ranch didn't sound the same. Normally it was the cattle bawling, the creak of the barn doors in the breeze, the hawks circling overhead. But that day, it was quiet. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a man feel like the storm hasn't arrived yet, but the clouds are already rolling in. I sat with my coffee on the porch, Paul's warning echoing in my mind. She's going after your bank. Karen was reckless, but she wasn't stupid. If she couldn't force her HOA rules on me, she would try to dismantle the very ground I stood on. And in a small town like ours, all it took was one rumor to start a fire. By noon, I saw the smoke. Not real smoke, but the kind that rises from whispered conversations at the diner, from hushed voices in the hardware store. Did you hear Carter's using the bank to crush the HOA? He's abusing his power. If he can do it to them, he can do it to anyone. Karen had set the rumor mill ablaze. And in a town where people's mortgages, savings, and paychecks all flowed through my bank, trust was everything. Without trust, I wasn't a banker, I was a target. That night Frank came by the ranch. He leaned against the porch railing, the glow of his cigar cutting through the dark. She's clever, he said, blowing smoke into the night air. Dangerous people get desperate when they lose power. But Carter, you have something she doesn't. What's that? I asked. He turned, his silver hair catching the moonlight. The truth, and truth, when timed right, can cut sharper than any lie. His words stuck with me. If Karen wanted to drag the bank into this war, then I'd let her, but on my terms. The opportunity came faster than I expected. A week later, the town council announced an open forum on community concerns. It was the kind of meeting where farmers complained about potholes and shopkeepers begged for tax breaks. But I knew, deep down, Karen would be there, and she'd use it as her stage. Sure enough, when I walked into the town hall, she was already at the front, papers stacked high like weapons ready to fire. She spotted me across the room, and her lips curled into that old familiar smirk. The smirk of someone who thought she'd found a new kingdom to rule. The crowd settled. The council chair tapped the microphone. Tonight we welcome comments on community issues. Karen rose before he even finished. Her voice rang out sharp, slicing through the air. I have evidence, she declared, holding up her papers. Evidence that Mr. Carter has used his position at the bank to intimidate and harass the residents of this town. He threatened our HOA. He stalled our projects. He's abusing financial power to settle personal vendettas. Gasps spread through the hall. Eyes turned toward me, suspicion flickering. Karen was winning hearts with fear, just like she always had. I didn't move. Not yet. I let her rant. Every word she spoke tightened the rope she was unknowingly wrapping around herself. Finally, when she slammed her stack of papers on the podium, I rose. Karen, I said, my voice calm but loud enough to carry. Are you done? She sneered. Do you deny it? I walked slowly to the front, the wooden floor creaking under my boots. No, I don't deny reviewing your HOA's accounts because that's my job. I don't deny freezing your loan because it was reckless, overextended, and unsustainable. Again, my job. What I deny, what I reject is this lie that protecting my family's ranch is an abuse of power. What you call abuse, I call responsibility. I turned to the council, to the crowd. You all know my family. You know this ranch. You know we've been here since before there was an HOA, before there were even paved roads. Karen tried to rewrite history with a letter. She tried to bully a ranch older than her neighborhood. And when she failed, she tried to drag this entire town into a war. The papers in Karen's hands shook. But here's the truth, I continued, pulling a smaller folder from my jacket. I have her letters, her threats, her fraudulent fines, her unlawful lien notices. I have proof signed, dated, undeniable, that the only abuse of power here has come from Karen herself. I laid the folder on the podium. The crowd leaned forward, murmurs rising. Karen's face drained of color. She stepped back, fumbling for words, but none came. The council chair cleared his throat, tapping the microphone again. Thank you, Mr. Carter will review this immediately, but the damage was already done. The room no longer looked at Karen as a leader. They looked at her the way people look at a storm that's past dangerous. But behind them now, Karen stumbled from the podium, her stack of papers slipping from her hands, scattering like fallen leaves across the floor. She crouched to grab them, but no one helped. Not a single hand reached down. I didn't stay for the rest of the meeting. I'd said what needed saying. As I walked out, the weight of 100 eyes followed me, not with suspicion this time, but with something else. Respect. But deep inside, I knew Karen wasn't finished. People like her never just fade. They lurk, they wait, and when you least expect it, they strike again. The town hall left Karen shaken, but not silent. That night, as I drove home along the dirt road that wound between the cedars, I could see headlights in my rearview mirror, too close, too persistent. When I slowed, they slowed. When I pulled off near the creek, they passed, engine revving louder than necessary, and in the split second their car cut across the beams of my headlights. I saw her profile corrode. She wasn't finished. The next morning, Frank arrived at my office carrying a thick envelope. She's filed a formal complaint with the State Banking Commission, he said, dropping it on my desk. The words on the cover stung sharper than any gossip, allegations of misconduct. Karen had played her final card. If the commission believed her, my entire career, my reputation could crumble. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. She wanted me ruined, not just humbled. She wanted my family's name dragged through the mud, the same way she tried to drag my ranch under her HOA net. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt the weight pressing down. But then I opened the envelope, and as I read her complaint, a slow smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. She hadn't just lied, she'd overplayed her hand. The complaint listed fraudulent manipulation of accounts, except every decision I'd made was documented, signed, time-stamped, and aligned with policy. She claimed I'd targeted the HOA for personal reasons, except my files showed routine compliance reviews, standard across all clients. Every accusation was smoke without fire. And in her desperation, she'd attached copies of her own violation. Letters, the same fraudulent documents Frank and I had already prepared as evidence. In trying to bury me, she'd dug her own grave. A week later, the commission hearing convened in a downtown office building. The room smelled of polished wood and cold coffee. Suits filled the chairs, briefcases lined the walls. At the far end sat the panel 3 officials, eyes sharp, voices sharper. Karen sat at the opposite table, her face powdered but pale, her stack of papers trembling as she adjusted them again and again. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. The lead commissioner began. Mr. Carter, allegations have been made against your use of position. Do you have a response? iRose.com/folder in hand. Yes, ma'am, I do. I laid out the timeline, the fraudulent fines, the unlawful lien letters, Karen's attempts to annex property never under her jurisdiction. I showed the recordings, the signed letters, the financial review process, all legal, all ethical, and then I laid her complaint beside it, the contradictions glowing under the fluorescent lights like ink stains on white linen. When I finished, the room was silent. The commissioners whispered among themselves, pages shuffling. Finally, the lead spoke again. Mr. Carter, your actions were appropriate and within regulation. These accusations are unsubstantiated. Karen's head snapped up, eyes wide. The commissioner's gaze shifted to her. However, Ms. Whitfield, her full name, slicing the air sharper than Karen ever could. Your submission contained knowingly false documents. This matter may be referred for further investigation. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time since this war began, she had no weapon left, only silence. When the gavel came down, it was more than a ruling, it was an ending. I stepped outside into the daylight, the city noise buzzing around me. For a long moment I just breathed. Fresh air, freedom, victory. That evening I returned to the ranch. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of fire. The cedar fence stood tall, shadows stretching across the dirt. My cattle grazed in quiet peace, unaware of the storm that had passed. From the porch, I could see headlights in the distance, a silver SUV slowing as it rolled by. Karen again. But this time there was no smirk, no clipboard. She didn't even look at me, just stared straight ahead, hands gripping the wheel, driving back to a neighborhood she no longer ruled. A life smaller than the power she once craved. I raised my coffee mug in a silent salute, not of respect, but of closure. She had tried to take my land, my history, even my name, and in the end, all she lost was everything she thought made her untouchable, because some battles aren't won with fists, some aren't even won with lawyers. The best victories are won when the other side realizes they picked the wrong man to fight. My ranch was safe. My family's legacy stood unbroken, and the HOA, it learned a lesson it would never forget. The war was over. And I hadn't just defended my land, I had defended the very ground my bloodline stood on for 150 years.